The Nurse Theorists, Portraits of Excellence, Volume 2. In this edition, we feature Dr. Afaf Meleis.
I am Afaf Ibrahim Meleis, born as Afaf Abdelbaki Ibrahim. Meleis was later on added to my name after marrying my husband, Mahmoud Meleis, some 44 years ago. I'm taping this now in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, thousands of miles away from where I was born and thousands of miles away from San Francisco, which I called home for over 30 years. I have many events, milestones, turning points, and transitions that have shaped my life experiences and who I am today, and I have no doubt they have also influenced the development of my theory on transitions. There are several pivotal cities in my life. First of those cities is Alexandria, Egypt, which is where I was born and where I went to the University of Alexandria and had my formative years. Alexandria is called Pearl of the Mediterranean. It was a very cosmopolitan port city with so many nationalities who lived there. The Christians, the Jews, the Muslims all lived harmoniously side by side. So I grew up cherishing and being enriched with diversity and craving actually diversity. My parents were not any different from that. My father started his career in the ports and lighthouses as a lighthouse keeper and supervisor. All my early memories of him are packing and unpacking enormous suitcases that looked like armoires. When he traveled, he would be gone for months at a time. Perhaps moving, traveling, and embracing new experiences are what I inherited with him. My passion for nursing was deeply inspired by my mother, a diploma graduate, a midwife, and a nurse. She was the first nurse in the Middle East to earn a bachelor's degree from the United States, and she was the first one to earn a master's degree and a PhD from Egyptian universities. Growing up, I watched her care for her female patients, women who had suffered female circumcisions or whose husbands brought them and wanted a medical proof of their wife's or daughter's virginity. It was her knowledge, her perspective, her compassion, and her diligent care of women that first ignited my passion for women's health. So in 1961, I completed my undergraduate education at the University of Alexandria, where I gained clinical skills and developed a commitment to the well-being of vulnerable populations. Following year, right after finishing there, I got a scholarship from Rockefeller Foundation and I came to the United States as a Rockefeller Fellow to pursue my graduate education at the University of California in Los Angeles. This is where I earned my master's in nursing in 1964. This is also where I earned my master's in arts and sociology in 1966 and my PhD in medical sociology and social psychology in 1968. My research goals remained nursing-related, but I chose to go into sociology, medical sociology, and social psychology because this is where I thought I would really develop my research capacity. I wanted to learn how to develop effective, well-tested models of care that make people live a healthy life. I think one of the things I remember about my career is that I have had such amazing, exceptional mentors. These people helped me see that theory and research-based solutions to the many vexing problems of healthcare are absolutely the only way to resolve those issues. I took a short sabbatical to go to Kuwait, which was the magnet for Kuwaitis to recruit me in 1977 to be the Dean of the Health Institute and to also serve as a visiting associate professor at the University of Kuwait. This was one of many unexpected yet serendipitous aspects of my career, as it was there that I worked with multicultural faculty, became even more convinced of how important it is to teach and practice research in women's health. I also experimented with different leadership styles because there are different leadership styles that are needed when you are working with a multicultural workforce and also a multicultural student body. It was during my 34-year tenure at the University of California, San Francisco, where I found my niche as a scientist and a scholar. I got out of administration and I said I will never go back to administration again, and I will be the scientist and the scholar for the rest of my life until I retire. I built a research program and an integrated practice that translated research to serve vulnerable populations, but also developing models of care for the immigrant population. These became the examples in my teaching, those practice areas. Throughout this journey, I researched, I mentored, I authored, taught, while my husband and I raised our two wonderful sons, Walid and Sharif. We saw them grow to be incredibly loving, compassionate, goal-oriented, and successful professionals. I think we probably would both say that they gave us the biggest joy in our lives. I also was really privileged to have established my national and international credibility, which brought me many outstanding opportunities to teach, mentor, and to do research around the globe. If one were to ask me where I received my best education, I would say without hesitation that I got it from the hundreds of students I taught, hundreds of students I also mentored. They were my best teachers. Although I had never intended on a deanship later in my career, my most recent professional transition occurred in 2002 when I became the dean of the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. I consider this as the best decision I have made in my life. I have other fulfilling roles in my life. I serve as the Consul General of the International Council on Women's Health Issues, ICOWI. I am on the board for CARE, which is an international humanitarian organization. I'm also a board member for Global Health Council, which develops policies related to global health. The work that I'm doing for the Institute of Medicine and the role of the United States in global health is immensely gratifying. I continued to grow through each transition personally and professionally. I do believe very strongly that nurses' central role and that nursing central mission is to facilitate people's transition toward health and well-being. I believe very strongly that our discipline is focused on advancing the science and the art of transitions.
Dr. Martha Alligood met with Dr. Meleis on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia.
Afaf, I'm so pleased to be here in Philadelphia with you today at the university to talk with you about transitions theory. It's wonderful to see you. After a number of years, we haven't seen each other. And to hear you, I know the viewers are going to be so pleased to hear you talk about transitions theory and its development in your own words.
Well, thank you for being here. I love seeing you again after so long. And I really look forward to sharing my ideas about transition because I'd love to have more people even using it in their work.
Well, that's great. The first thing I want to talk with you about this morning is about the development of the theory. Can you talk to us about how it all got started?
Yes, and what's really important for the viewers to know that theories don't evolve suddenly as a theory. There are different parts of it that evolve and then that gets connected. So way back then in the 60s, I did my first research study, and it was part of my master thesis, looking at what happened to people with long-term illness and how their families adjust to it. And one of the things that came out from this study was how important interaction and relationships are in actually framing the consequences of that transition of being diagnosed with long-term illness. So that's the first part. And then the second research study was my doctoral dissertation. And actually, I looked at something completely different. I looked at family planning and how what would make couple more effective in planning their family. And this is where the whole notion of roles and relationships also got intensified. I found out from this extensive study on effectiveness of family planning that the more couples knew about each other's roles, perceived correctly each other's roles, the better they were in anticipating the process of being effective in planning their family, and actually were effective in planning their family. So I put those two things together and began to think about, so what is the intervention, what's the care model that we work with as nurses to help people go through transitions and actually come out of it in a healthy way and mastering some of the rules. So this was sort of the beginning of transition theory. At the time, I was not thinking about the transition itself. I was very interested in what nurses actually do, but they didn't have words to describe it. And what are the effects of their work? So I actually have one of my very first papers was, does nursing intervention make a difference? And that's very early 70s. So I began to look at different nurses' actions in groups, because it was the 60s and there were lots of the T groups, and we all had our little group of trying to help people through something that's going on in their lives. So I was working with new parents, and my colleagues was working with patients who have been diagnosed with mastectomy or colostomy, and looking at what did nurses do to help people during this process to really maintain their health, which is nursing. Nursing is about maintaining health and health promotion, and about a sense of well-being. Yeah. So the first part was the development of that intervention plan, which I called role supplementation.
Well, I think sometimes we get focused on the process of the nurse, but as I listen to you today, it occurs to me that your work is very much focused on that process of the patient and how the nurse works with the patient coming through that process.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. But it's really, I was looking at the interaction between nurses and patients. So two things were going on at the time. It was the beginning movement of theoretical nursing, and trying to articulate what nursing is about and give it words and have concepts to describe it. So I wanted to describe what nurses do very effectively, but in relationship to what people are going through themselves. So then I began realizing that actually not all transitions might be the same, because there are the developmental transitions, which is what nurses get involved in. There are the health illness transitions. There are, actually at the time I was not thinking even of organizational transitions, but situational transitions, a loss of a partner, or coming in and going out of the hospital, discharge, and admission planning. At the time, I was not interested in describing transition itself and the processes of transition, but I was more interested in seeing if nurses make a difference, and what difference do they make? What are the outcomes of that? Because it was also the era where legislators were asking questions about, why do we need highly educated nurses? What difference?
I remember that period, so I know
what difference does it make?
Yes.
So that was the beginning, was the development of role supplementation. Then in about the 80s, I began to realize that actually I planned this great intervention based on what nurses do and based on my perception of what patients and their families are going through. So I backtracked and said, I think we need to really describe the transition experience itself. I was very fortunate because Norma Check, who was the dean at Palmerston North in New Zealand, came to work with me as a postdoc. And so she and I then began to look at the experience of transition itself and try to really develop the nuances of it and understand how people experience it and what the responses are to it. And so this was then we began focusing on part of the bigger picture, which is what do nurses do to help people, to patients, families, clients, organizations, and what do they go through when they are experiencing changes.
Well, that's really fascinating. I think transitions is a little more known than those earlier studies. Is that true?
No, I think the earlier work has been used extensively because what we did with the role supplementation, we actually did clinical trials, and many people used it with heart condition patients, with elderly patients going through transition. But what people looked at was, okay, let's do the role transition, which is bringing a group together, a critical mass of people to help each other. Let's clarify roles that they might go through. Let's enhance interaction between them. Let's give them support. And at the end of that, then probably people will have patients, clients, new families, new parents will have a more healthful end outcome of the transition. So it's well known in that, and it's really part and parcel of it, because that's what helped us as a group interested in it to backtrack and say, all right, is this the best transition? Is this the best transition package for everybody, or should it be individualized in a different way?
Was there a particular person that influenced the development of your theory?
A number of people. Early on in my career, Burton Meyer, who is a psychologist and an impeccable researcher, was my mentor. And this is where I learned clinical trials and also learned that evidence-based is extremely important for our practice. Then Ralph Turner, who is a social psychologist and a family interaction person, is a theorist actually in my life. And he conceptualized people. He comes from symbolic interactionist heritage, which is my heritage also. He conceptualized people in terms of roles. So I naturally then started seeing people in terms of roles. And when change happened, there are changes in roles, there are changes in interactions, there are changes in networks. So that fed into the development of role supplementation. But then my mentees were extremely important in really shaping the theory, and among them Norma Check, who came to work with me, and then later on different mentees, Karen Schumacher, Deanne Messias, Inuk M, Linda Sawyer. So all these people really are partners in the development of transition.
And they were doctoral students, were they?
They were doctoral students and postdoctoral students, and at different phases, and many of our publications are together.
Next, I'd like for you to tell us, I think sometimes when people come up and they just ask you, tell me about your theory of transitions. There's probably a brief answer that you have to that question. Could you share that with our viewers?
Well, Martha, I'll give you a description, but I don't know how brief I could be because I think it's a very rich theory and has many dimensions. And it's also very important for the viewers to know that it evolved and mushroomed and became even more complex as we worked on it. But I start from a definition, and transition is a passage between two fairly stable periods of stability in one's life. And it's triggered by an event or a series of events, and it's a process that involves changes in people, either changes in their interaction, changes in the roles they play, changes in the network. And all those changes are disruptive to a person or a family or a community. So the theory is about the experience that people go through, their perception of that experience, their awareness of that experience, and the consequences at the end of that disruptive period. What are the outcomes of that? Or even there are process outcomes on the way. And it's all depends on how people, on the event that happened, that triggers the changes, but it's also on the network, on how clear people are about what's going on their awareness of it, engagement. So these are very important properties. This is how we describe theories. It's in terms of the properties. What is it that you see? And in nursing in particular, it's about responses of people. So that's one part of the theory. But then the consequences of it, at the end of which, is what nursing is about. Nursing is about a sense of well-being. and it's about being healthy. So the question we ask at the end of this disruptive period, which is between two fairly stable periods, what are possible outcomes? Well, one of the possible outcomes is a sense of well-being. It's a realignment and a harmony in people's roles. It's a mastery of this new condition that people are in. And it is healthful relationships in spite of those interactions. So part of it is that there are the nature of the transition and what triggered it, which are either developmental, health, illness, situational, or organizational. Then the properties of what are the experiences of people and how they perceive it and the meaning of that they put on it. And it's the consequences of mastery of relationship, mastery of roles, and a sense of I'm healthy at the end of this transition, or I'm a mess and I'm not healthy at the end of the transition.
You know, Afaf, I think sometimes people say, oh, transitions, it's just about change. And they don't understand that it's a group of concepts that are brought together and that there's meaning in the relationship of those concepts. Now, what would the nurse be doing as they use this theory, I guess is what I would ask.
Change is an event or a situation. Transition is the people's experience of it and how they are responding to it. Change might happen at a point in time. Transition is a process, a long process. It could happen before the change is anticipated. Say a person who is having elective surgery. The transition for that person starts way before the surgery itself. It starts in anticipating it. It starts in asking questions about it, making a decision about whether to do it or not, getting information about it. So for nurses, that's what we deal with. Nurses deal with the process of decision making from the moment that they decide or decide to do something, or from the moment that something happened in their life. So nurses don't deal with the change only. So, it's really important for people to know that we didn't discover something and overlaid on what nurses do. We looked at what nurses do and do so well, and we tried to give it some name, to give it credibility, to give it legislation, to give it support, and to provide a framework so that we can study different parts of it, so that we would be able to, at the end, to say, what are the best processes and interventions that nurses could do to enhance a sense of well-being at the end of this very disrupted period and maintain the healthy relationships that people have in their life and have a sense of mastery and ability to care for themselves at the end of that period. So it is a whole thing. It's conditions that predispose to the transition. It's the properties of transition itself, which includes, some of the things I talked about. It's the consequences of it. But later on, we also, with my mentees and my colleagues and through a series of research projects, we found out that it's not only a personal perception and awareness and engagement. If the society does not provide the mechanisms for people to go through a healthy transition, then they're not going to go through a healthy transition with healthy outcomes. So we actually needed to look at family conditions, societal conditions, stereotyping, marginalization, because these all are important conditions that affect the experience of transition and the consequences of transition.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. Next, I'd like for us to talk about how you have, your theory has been used in research, in education, and in practice, and share with us about those areas, please.
Well, it's really interesting because it evolved from actually clinical observations. So we observed clients, we observed nurses, and that was the beginning of role supplementation and then our interest in transition. So clinical practice is extremely important in shaping, in driving the development of the theory. But we couldn't have done it without research, without the clinical trials to find out if role supplementation makes a difference or not, and without the research to uncover the properties of what the transition is like. So research is extremely important to it. What is most exciting now in this time is that here I am at the University of Pennsylvania with a premier researcher in transitional care model, Dr. Mary Naylor. So now we have a center called Transitions and Health, New Cortland Center for Transitions and Health.
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
it houses a number of researchers who are interested in different populations. But what brings them together is their passion about finding the best model of care to help people in their transition through illness, through aging, through dementia, and to come out of it healthy and masterful and with good relationships. So research is extremely important, and I believe that this is a time when a transition and health area is really going to take off in a completely different way than we have ever anticipated, because people are aging, because people are leaving the hospital much earlier, because of chronic illnesses. So it is essential that we conceptualize that and we provide the research to help people live healthy in spite of so many things that are going on, as I mentioned, leaving hospitals earlier and so forth. So that's in terms of research. That's the cornerstone of this. Education, I have been fascinated to hear from colleagues from different parts of this country and internationally that they are using it as a framework either for courses or they are using it as a framework for education. I didn't develop it to be used in terms of that, but I definitely, whenever I teach students, I think about their work in terms of whether they are looking at some aspect of transition or developing some aspect of supplementing roles or developing transitional care model. I found out that I use it very extensively with any new cohort of students coming into an institution.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think of them as going through a transition. They left, even if they are undergraduate, they left the high school, familiar environment, a network, family. They are going through passing from a very stable period in their life into a very unstable period because they have a new dorm, they have new teachers, they have a new way of teaching. So I think of what would help them really go through this period and master the period. Learn about libraries, learn about what's expected of them, the guidelines, and so on. So it has definitely been instrumental in my work educationally as I help the doctoral students along and postdoctoral students along.
So the students could do projects through the center, working with the faculty who are in this new center, and be a part of their research,
Absolutely.
perhaps?
That research center led by Dr. Mary Naylor and a number of our faculty, it's interdisciplinary, and it has doctoral students and postdoctoral students, and it's getting such notoriety, and also people are seeking the center from all over the world. So there is, that this is a very important area for helping people to be able to take care of themselves and have a sense of well-being at the same time. But it's also important for insurance companies and for hospitals to realize that there is a transition period for patients, that a transition team is needed to help people along. We can't just discharge people and expect family members to take care of them with all the technology that's happening and all the complexity of healthcare that's going on. So we are also realizing that even the informal caregivers go through transition of being novices at the beginning of what to do, what to watch for, when to think that this is serious or not serious, until they become expert at picking that up. Dr. Karen Schumacher is the premier person who has been doing the work on actually the caregiver, transition of the caregiver to become an effective caregiver.
All right.
So the last part of your question is about practice. And I guess it's being used extensively in practice as a framework. There are some outpatient departments, and I can't name them right now because I get this in emails, who are using it as a framework for development of the care packages or care models that the nurses are using. So I hear from my colleagues its utility as a framework in all those areas.
It seems to me that this transitions would really have utility for hospitalized patients and nurses working in that setting. It would certainly increase the awareness.
But it's not only being aware of it, which is important because it's giving it a name, but it's really developing the care models of care that help people through this transition toward a sense of well-being. So it's planning ahead of time. We defined actually nursing as facilitating transitions. So that's, and I do believe very strongly, and my colleagues believe very strongly, that is the most major contribution that nurses do in their practice. The walls of the hospital are not the walls for patient discharge, actually. You discharge people from a hospital because of a medical condition, but you discharge people from nursing care after they have gone through a healthy transition and they have mastered the outcome, which is the new roles, whether it's an at-risk role, taking care of themselves, self-care. So I think it's really important. The transition is not bound by the walls of the hospital. It happens way before and it happens way after. And we have to legislate and have nurses take care of people before and after if we don't want a revolving door policy for patients coming back.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's interesting. Fascinating. Thank you. Afaf, do you consider the development of this transitions theory your most important contribution to nursing?
It's one of my most important contributions. I think what this has contributed is provide a coherent framework that help people conceptualize what it is that they do and they do well, and help people also conceptualize what questions to ask. So that's a contribution. But another contribution related to the theory is to uncover the lived experience of people going through transition and the properties of what it is that they go through and what influences the outcome, which is a sense of well-being. So it provided a really nice critical thinking point for future researchers and for future scholars. So that's, I think, one, I believe, major. And more contributions are yet to come because they're related to the theory that help in uncovering other transition experiences. I think my area is women's health, and I consider one of my major contributions is shedding light on development and women and global issues in women's health, and really bringing that to the forefront with other people to really think about that we are part of a very large population and that we can't be thinking about women's health only from our U.S. perspective, but there are other things going on in the world. And related to that is role integration. I looked at how women tend to manage their various roles and integrate them or compartmentalize them as they and maintain their health. So the question we started with that line of scholarship is, how do women who work so hard and have so many responsibilities, what do they do to maintain their health and keep their sanity and continue to be well? And so it's, women are vulnerable. Transition makes people vulnerable. It increases their possibilities of becoming marginalized during transition. And these are very much connected in my mind, even though on one side I really developed transition, the other side we developed role integration, and putting it together, it's the population we deal with are vulnerable women.
Afaf, it's been wonderful being here with you and talking with you, hearing about transitions theory and your ideas about that today. And I wonder, as we close this interview, is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
Well, I would like to add that theories require, for their development, a very deliberate program of research, and it requires having a group of people and dialogue between the people to be able to sort through the different concepts and really develop a coherent way of thinking about phenomena, and that they are dynamic and continuous in development, and that I am looking forward to having many scholars and scientists continue to refine the theory and develop it in a completely different way.
Afaf, it's wonderful to be here with you today and to see you again after a number of years and to interview you and learn more about transitions theory here at the University of Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your vision of putting some of those theories in the mouth of the people who have developed them. And I hope you tell the viewers that we are at the stage of not only middle range theory, but situation specific theories, and this is a responsibility of all scholars and scientists in nursing. While there have been many changes and growth in my life, my scholarship, my education, and my practice started from watching my mother treat patients in her midwifery office, or to serving as a dean of one of the greatest schools of nursing in the country. The one thing that has remained a constant in my life is my belief in the power of nursing and the promise of nursing science, and how theory drives the practice and drives nursing science.